560. The Answer.
Good Thursday morning. Amy Jacobson here, Charles Thomas, in for Dan Proft. Always good to have you.
Good morning.
Such a busy day. Our first time working together, and so far so good. So let's keep this party going.
Okay.
Now, yesterday I was a little shocked. I read what President Trump put out on Truth Social, basically aligning with the talking points of Russia, calling Zelensky a dictator and blaming them for this 3-year war with Russia.
You've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
I'm not surprised, Amy, at all by any of this.
Really?
What they're calling Putin talking points, I've been hearing that from on the internet for 3 years since all this began. You know, Tulsi Gabbard is one who basically talked the same way 3 years ago. You got Professor John Mearsheimer at the University of Chicago, a noted foreign affairs expert, saying the same thing the president said yesterday. Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia University. Larry Johnson, a former CIA analyst, has been saying this. And Colonel Douglas McGregor, a retired U.S. colonel who worked in the first Trump administration, has been saying the same thing about Zelensky and this whole Ukraine situation for 3 years now. It's the Biden administration's propaganda machine, its talking points that have been so wrong about this and who have cost so many lives in Ukraine, both Russian and Ukrainian lives, and they've been misleading the American public about this conflict in Ukraine.
And how can he have lost millions of dollars that we've given him? How does that happen?
Millions, billions.
Billions of dollars. Real quick, just so you know, Chicago Ukrainians reacted, and of course they say the cost of war is felt by all Ukrainians, whether you live in Chicago or in the homeland.
A friend from my school died last week. And I mean, probably every Ukrainian family has someone who is in the front line.
And most of the people this is from ABC 7-Year-Old Stomping Grounds, most of the people they interviewed said they feel betrayed by Trump.
I think that we need to work together with the United States, because without the United States, it will be extremely tough to continue this war, to fight back.
But sounds like they don't have the support of the United States anymore. With that, let's welcome to the program George Beebe. He's director of grand strategy at the Quincy Institute. He spent more than 2 decades in government as an intelligence analyst, diplomat, and policy advisor, including as director of the CIA's Russia analysis and a director of CIA's Open Source Center, and as a staff advisor on Russia Matters to Vice President Cheney. He has a book called The Russian Trap: How Our Shadow War with Russia Could Spiral into Nuclear Catastrophe. Good morning, Mr. Beebe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yeah, so when you heard Trump align with Russian talking points, so to speak, what was your reaction? Were you surprised? Because my partner, Charles, here was not.
Well, no, I wasn't surprised. I think part of this is because there has been a long-running information war that has gone on in parallel to the fighting between the Russian and Ukrainian armies on the battlefield. That's been a battle to shape how people understand this conflict, what caused it, and what are the ways out of it. And there are 2 big schools of thought. One we'll call the Nazi Germany school, which says this is a lot like World War II, where Hitler woke up and said, I want other people's land. I want to dominate Europe. I'm going to launch a war of aggression. And the only way you stop that kind of problem is to fight back with resolute military force. And the last thing you do is appease. But that's only one view on this. That's been the dominant view in mainstream media. But a lot of experts have said, wait a minute, this war is a lot more like World War I, an escalation spiral in which defensive steps that one side takes get perceived as threatening by the other side, and you get into an action-reaction dynamic. And the only way you get out of that kind of spiral is through diplomacy, is through compromise. So there are really contending schools of thought here, and Trump has come down in that latter school. He has said that this is an escalation spiral. It's continuing to intensify. If we don't stop this war, if we don't find a way to compromise, it's going to get worse, winding up either in Ukraine's complete destruction or in some World War III kind of scenario. So this is, it's not surprising that Trump is saying the things that he's saying right now.
George, wasn't the CIA involved in the 2014 coup in Ukraine that overthrew the democratically elected president there, who was pro-Russian, and wasn't the Ukrainian army bombing the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine for years after that coup?
Well, I don't know that the CIA itself was involved in the 2014 Maidan revolution, as they called it. But there's no question that a large group of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, funded heavily by the United States government, played a critical role in that whole scenario. And the perception on Russia's part was that this was a U.S.-backed coup, and that in turn led to this spiral of action and reaction that at first was between Ukrainians in the east and the Donbass and the central Ukrainian government, but eventually exploded into this invasion in 2022. So Trump's point in all of this was this was an escalation spiral. It could have been stopped years ago. It should have been stopped through diplomacy, and we're going to do that now.
The Russians were saying that they were defending those who lived in the Russian-speaking areas of eastern Ukraine, and that's why they invaded, to protect those areas from the Ukrainian government, which was increasingly controlled by far right-wing, a.k.a. Nazis, in Ukraine.
Yeah, that is what the Russians have contended happened. I think the reality is probably a little bit more complex than that. Nonetheless, I think you've accurately described the way the Russians perceive things, and they've acted on those perceptions. And the way you solve a situation like that is through diplomacy. You have to talk about how to find your way out of this escalation spiral and how to address misperceptions that can be, as they were in this case, quite deadly.
I want to ask you about Trump's comments yesterday, specifically about Zelensky being a dictator. He wrote, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing, all in capitals. He refuses to have elections. Is that true? And that's why he's a dictator?
Well, I suspect that there's a lot going on behind the scenes on this that we're not seeing. We're only seeing the public part of this. And what I suspect has been happening behind the scenes is that Zelensky has attempted to veto a negotiating process with the Russians between Washington and Moscow, and has attempted to coerce the United States into providing a NATO-style Article 5 security guarantee, a pledge that we will go to war with Russia to protect Ukraine in the future. And that's not something that the United States is willing to do. Trump has rejected this, and I think he is sending a clear message to Zelensky that Zelensky cannot torpedo negotiations on this. Will he have a voice in certain aspects of the settlement, aspects that directly involve Ukraine? I think that is absolutely the case. Ukraine has to be involved in that part of it. But this is going to be a negotiation that has sequences. And the first part of this is between Russia and the United States. They're not going to cut a deal about Ukrainian territory, certainly. But they are going to talk about broader strategic relationships, the broader European security architecture, arms control, normalizing our relationship with Russia. That provides a context in which it will be easier to solve the Ukraine-Russia aspects of all of this. That is still to come.
Well, he's not. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others are meeting with Russian counterparts in Saudi Arabia, and Zelensky is being kept out of that conversation. Why?
Because it's not yet time. the Russians really think that this is a geopolitical conflict between Russia and the United States. And the United States has been using the NATO alliance and the prospect of moving NATO forces onto Ukrainian territory as a geopolitical threat to essentially either prevent Russia from having security on its borders, or ultimately to foment regime change inside of Russia. And Russia has said, no, this is not acceptable to us. And they want to discuss that bigger issue with Washington. Once that, I think, makes progress, it'll be a lot easier to settle the issues between Russia and Ukraine in all of this. So I don't think Ukraine is being cut out altogether. It's just that the first sequence of this negotiation has got to be between Moscow and Washington.
At all. And there are reports that Zelensky's favorability in his own country, Ukraine, is only about 4%. Do you have any reaction to those claims?
Well, yeah, a couple of points on this. I don't think we know really what Zelensky's public approval rating is. That was news to me when President Trump said it was 4%. I don't know where he's getting that figure. It would not surprise me, though, if he has a fairly low rating. The war is not going well right now for the Ukrainians. A lot of people are dying. A lot of people are objecting to forced military conscription. And dissent and opposition is essentially ruled out in Ukraine right now. So we don't have a very good idea of exactly how the Ukrainian people feel about Zelensky. Now, in terms of having an election, I think that is important for a couple of reasons. One is I think Ukraine's future has got to be in the European Union. And in order to qualify for that membership, Ukraine has got to hold elections. It's got to bring its political system into conformity with EU requirements. And the Russians are also concerned that Zelensky's term of office, when he was elected in 2019, has expired. And they worry about signing some sort of peace accord with him that some subsequent Ukrainian leader will say is not legally binding because Zelensky was not actually the legal president at the time. So they want some assurances on that.
Wasn't Joe Biden outright lying when he said that Putin had already lost the war, when in fact the Ukrainians were losing the war and losing it badly when the former president said that?
Well, I wouldn't say he was lying. I think what he was trying to say, which I think was in fact accurate, was that Russia's bid to conquer all of Ukraine, to capture the capital city, to raise the flag of Russia over Kyiv, had failed, and that Russia was not going to be able to accomplish that. That part, I think, is true. Now, can Russia still essentially produce a collapse of the Ukrainian military, sap Ukraine's willingness and ability to continue fighting? That I think they can do. But that, I think, is one of the reasons why we need to have a peace accord soon, so that Russia has to make compromises to settle this war rather than dictate the terms of a settlement.
All right. And if you could look into your crystal ball, how do you see this ending?
Well, I think this is going to end in a peace settlement. And my guess is that we will at least have an armistice, perhaps not a full peace settlement, but a durable end to fighting on the battlefield sometime this year.
And Donald Trump should win the Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, that remains to be seen, but I don't doubt that he sees himself as a peacemaker in this particular war.
Yeah, the one thing, well, how did it, not talk about feelings, but what was your reaction when he said that Zelensky started the war? Because clearly Russia invaded them.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I am someone that believes this is the product of an escalatory spiral. Both sides contributed to this action-reaction dynamic. And I do fault the United States and to some degree Ukraine for not seeking a compromise before the invasion when I think it was possible. And I wrote at the time urging that. That said, I think Putin and Russia are fully responsible for the decision to invade. They did not have to do that, despite the dynamic that was underway at the time. So I don't think there should be any lack of clarity that Putin made this decision.
All right. Thank you so much, George Beebe. We're going to have to leave it there for today. Director of Grand Strategy at Quincy Institute. And where can we pick up your book? Tell us about your book.
Well, it's available online, certainly through Amazon.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Beebe. We appreciate it, and we'll have you back soon.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
Do you hear that?
Hear what?
It sounds like crickets.
Oh, that? Yeah, I brought a big bag of crickets with me.
Why, Ben?
Well, we're talking about the new and improved M100 motorized sectional at Penny Mustard today, right?
Yes.
And just yesterday, I overheard you telling Arvid that the M100 sectional was indescribable.
That's true. Words won't do it justice.
And you told Nicole anyone who reclines in the M100 sectional is flabbergasted.
It's awe-inspiring. If there was a Mount Rushmore of sectionals, the M100 would take all 4 spots.
So to maximize the impact of the M100's ability to cause reverent silence...
You brought crickets?
Yes.
To work?
Of course.
I'm speechless.
Obviously.
The M100 sectional sofa, starting at just $700 a month, with only 1 penny down and no interest until August of 2026. Through